For the first time since she had scaled the building's outer wall the previous night, Charlotte had an opportunity to take a deep breath and take stock of the situation. She was free to wander around the room, and this was her first chance to really assess the odds of escape. Charlotte looked around at the room and caught sight of a large mirror that was stood behind the headboard of the crib she had slept in. She waddled her way over to it in curiosity. She had yet to get a good look at herself. The image in the mirror was weird. It was as if Charlotte recognized herself, but the situation was so strange and outlandish that her brain struggled to process it. The pink onesie was stretched tightly over the thick diaper underneath, and the little papery edges of the leg bands poked out as an extra, unnecessary reminder as to what she was wearing. The way Charlotte's hips and butt stuck out with the padding around her waist made her feel much smaller than she was. Combined with the crinkling sound and the fluffy material between her legs, and she could see her resemblance to an infant. Charlotte also noticed a small black symbol stenciled over the middle of the onesie. She hadn't taken the time to look before, but she now realized the onesie was stamped with a small silhouette of a stork carrying a basket. It all started making sense. Stork Industries took people and sold them to other people. More specifically, they seemed to take people and treat them as babies before sending them on. Charlotte shuddered as she realized she was basically a pawn in a modern-day slave trade. She had to fight the urge to rip everything off of herself. All that would do was bring the nanny back along with some unwanted punishments. She had to be smart and remain calm. Charlotte distracted herself from these horrid thoughts by further examining her surroundings. The room was large and mostly empty. The walls and ceiling were all white and very clean. The floor was a black carpet that had a large white rug in the middle. It all looked fairly basic, as if the function of the room far outweighed the need for design. The area with the conveyor belt that had delivered Charlotte the previous night had a thick steel door that was closed and didn't budge when Charlotte gave it a push. The most obvious escape route was blocked off. The walls were full of shelves that had toddler-age books and toys all over them. There were no windows and only one other door, the door Nanny used to enter and exit. Charlotte couldn't even see a vent or anything that she could pry open in some way. Charlotte walked around the room a little, and the only sound she heard was her crinkling diaper. Every step a reminder of her position. Slowly she adjusted to the sound and it became a lot less obvious. She didn't know if that was a good thing or not. Nothing in the room was of much interest to the young woman. Absolutely everything in there was for a baby, from the books to the toys, and it had all been scaled up. Charlotte felt smaller just by virtue of the everything around her being larger. It was eerie to see a rocking horse that was big enough that Charlotte would need some help to get onto it. "Hello," Charlotte shouted near the door that the nanny had left. Her voice echoed slightly in the cavernous room, but there was no response. Even when pressing her ear to the door, she could hear no noise beyond. Charlotte waddled back into the center of the room and looked for something to do. Escape looked impossible at the moment, so she needed something to fill her time. She saw the television that had moved to her bed the previous night and walked over to it. With few options that interested her, Charlotte pressed the power button and turned the screen on. The television sparked to life and the same woman that Charlotte saw yesterday appeared on the screen. Next to her were some options for different sections of video. Was this a touch screen? Charlotte reached forward and pressed the button labeled History. A loading screen appeared briefly before the woman came back. Stork Industries was founded 10 years ago to provide a service that allowed individuals or couples to experience the joy of parenthood without the need for pregnancy or birth. The woman's artificial smile never left her perfectly made-up face. Volunteers or people that have been volunteered are brought here and entered into our online catalog before being sold to our discerning customers. The woman had a bouncy voice, as if this was a great honor for people like Charlotte to be here. "We operate with UN approval and have a history of many happy parents and babies." The screen flickered back to the main menu and Charlotte was left with a frown on her face. Did she say the UN? Charlotte rewatched the History section again to make sure, and the woman on the screen definitely referred to the United Nations. That can't be true. Can it? Charlotte muttered to herself. It really was very unfortunate that the young woman was trapped in this seemingly inescapable room, because this was clearly a story that would make international headlines. If she ever got the chance to write this article, she would become one of the investigative journalist greats. Distracting herself from the painful thoughts of her future, Charlotte looked back at the screen and pressed a different button. She took a deep breath and began watching the training section. She knew that this would likely inform her of what was about to happen, and sometimes the old adage of ignorance is bliss could ring true. Training has been honed over years of refinement to a fine craft. The smiling woman said, "What once took months now only takes days, and that is because of our revolutionary subliminal video reprogramming. We aim to gently regress the subject in a nurturing environment before sending them on to the customers." Charlotte shuddered. So just a few days in this nursery before being shipped off to God knows where. She couldn't help but shake her head at the "gently regress" statement. If this was gentle, Charlotte didn't want to see harsh. There was one button that Charlotte wouldn't press. There was a button marked Future, and Charlotte knew that if she saw the woman dispassionately write off her future, that she would fall apart. She had to keep everything together to look for a way out. Charlotte switched the television off and looked around the room again. The crinkling from her waist was very frustrating and distracting. She needed something to do. Anything that might pass some time without her having to dwell on the situation. After a few minutes of searching, Charlotte found a coloring book, and after initially discarding it, she picked it back up as the only activity that seemed remotely interesting to her. With no tables or chairs in the room, it meant that Charlotte was forced to put the small book on the floor in front of her. She pulled a tub of felt-tip pens over and started coloring without enthusiasm. In the back of her mind, Charlotte couldn't help but feel incredibly silly to be laying there like she was, but the only alternative she had would be to contemplate what was coming, which was a lot worse. Charlotte had no idea how much time had passed when the door to the nursery suddenly opened again. Charlotte quickly stood up suspiciously and felt the Onacy pull her diaper closer to her body. The padding was still clean and dry, but Charlotte was aware that her bladder wanted to be emptied. A thought that had been in the back of her mind for a while, but she tried to ignore.